Welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom. Before we get started, do us a favor and, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.
Definitely helps us out.
Yeah, it really does help us grow and all that. So,
Yeah.
I just want to get that out of the way. But today we're diving deep into a case that's got South Africa talking the arrest and bail hearing of Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla. And
Oh, yeah, this is an interesting one.
definitely, and, you might recognize the name. She's the daughter of former President Jacob Zuma.
That's right. And what makes this case so fascinating is that it really brings together so many different things. Politics, social media, freedom of expression,
Right.
all against the backdrop of those 2021 July riots.
Yeah, let's back up for a second for anyone who might not remember all the details about those riots.
Sure.
They happened because Jacob Zuma was arrested for refusing to work with a commission that was investigating corruption during his presidency and the unrest that followed. It was devastating. Over 350 people died. The country lost billions of rands in damages.
Absolutely. It was a really pivotal moment in South African history. And now, almost 4 years later, Duduzile's arrest and this bail hearing have brought those events back into the spotlight.
It's amazing how this case really boils down to how you interpret online speech, right? Like, we're not talking about a physical weapon here, but the prosecution is saying that her words actually had a dangerous impact.
Right. And to be specific, the charges against her are serious ones. We're talking about incitement to commit terrorism and public violence, all stemming from what she was posting on social media during those chaotic weeks back in 2021.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Her defense team is really pushing back hard.
Yeah.
They're saying that even though her posts were full of anger and frustration about her father being locked up, they never directly called for violence.
Yeah. And they're making a big deal about how long it took for the state to actually file charges. We're talking almost 4 years between the riots and these charges.
Right. So they're basically saying, like, what took so long?
Exactly.
That delay definitely adds a whole other layer of complexity to this. So let's break down the legal stuff here. What exactly does the state need to prove to get a conviction?
Well, under South Africa's Terrorism Act, the burden of proof is really high. It's not just enough to show that she was angry or that she used strong language. They have to prove a clear link between her specific posts on social media and the violence that happened during the riots.
Okay, so it can't just be like a vague connection. It has to be concrete.
Exactly. And to complicate things even further, this case falls under what's called a Schedule 6 offense in South African law.
Okay, so what does that mean in plain English?
Essentially, it reverses who has to prove what when it comes to bail. So usually the state has to prove why someone should be kept in jail before their trial.
Right.
But under Schedule 6, which includes really serious crimes like terrorism, it's up to the person accused to show the court why there are special circumstances that justify letting them out on bail.
Got it. So even though the state wasn't against bail in this case, Duduzile still had to meet this higher standard to be released.
Exactly, because Schedule 6 offenses are seen as more of a risk to public safety. It makes it a lot harder to get bail.
So what arguments did her lawyers use to make their case?
Well, they had a few key points. First, they emphasized that most of the evidence against her is from social media posts, and like we've been talking about, those posts need to be interpreted.
Yeah.
They're arguing that it's really hard to prove someone's intentions based just on what they say online.
So basically they're saying that even if her words seem inflammatory, it's a whole different thing to prove that they actually caused violence.
Exactly. And they also brought up Duduzile's close relationship with her father. His arrest is what triggered the riots in the first place. And they're saying that it's important to understand her emotional state and what she was saying online during that time.
Yeah.
They want the court to see her actions as coming from a place of family loyalty and stress, not some planned effort to cause chaos.
Right, so they're trying to paint a picture of her reacting to a very intense situation, not as someone who is deliberately trying to incite anything.
Right, and on top of that, they highlighted her public service roles. She's an elected member of both the South African Parliament and the Pan-African Parliament.
Now, for those of us who might not be familiar with those institutions, could you quickly explain what they are?
Oh, sure. So the South African Parliament is basically the country's legislative body. Like Congress in the U.S., it's responsible for making laws.
Okay.
The Pan-African Parliament is a continental body made up of representatives from different African countries. And their goal is to promote unity and cooperation across the continent and to push for policies that benefit all Africans.
Got it. So by bringing up Duduzile's membership in these institutions, Her legal team was essentially saying that locking her up would stop her from doing her job serving the public.
Exactly. They were saying it was another reason why her circumstances were exceptional and that she should be granted bail.
Okay, so we have all these legal arguments, but if the state wasn't even against bail, why go through the trouble of arresting her in the first place?
That's where it gets really interesting and where you see the little details of the legal system at work. You see, even though they weren't against bail, the state argued that arresting her was necessary because of that Schedule 6 classification we talked about.
Okay.
They said that because the charges were so serious, the magistrate needed the chance to actually evaluate the exceptional circumstances Och meant for bail.
I see.
And they said that wouldn't have been possible if she had just been summoned to court.
So basically, they arrested her so the judge could decide whether to grant bail, even though they weren't planning on keeping her in jail.
Pretty much, it does seem a little bit like a legal catch-22.
It does.
But it highlights the specific procedures they have to follow in these types of cases. But that's where Duduzile's lawyers really pushed back.
Yeah.
They argued that the arrest, even though it was done by the book, was unnecessary.
Right.
They pointed out that she was totally willing to cooperate, and the state itself even said she wasn't a flight risk.
Yeah. So it seems like they're saying why all the drama she was ready to show up in court on her own. It does make you wonder if the arrest was more for show than anything legally necessary.
It definitely adds another layer to an already complicated situation, and this back and forth between the prosecution and the defense, it really highlights the tension at the core of this case.
Right.
On one hand, you have the state trying to do their job, uphold the law, make sure someone's held accountable for actions that contributed to all of this violence and chaos.
Right.
But then on the other hand, you have the defense saying, hold on, those actions need to be seen in context, and the right to free speech, even when it's controversial or unpopular, has to be protected.
It's like a classic legal battle where both sides have legitimate points.
Absolutely.
And the outcome could really set a major precedent for how online speech is interpreted and regulated in South Africa.
Absolutely. This case isn't just about Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla. It's about drawing lines in the digital world. Like, how do we separate heated online talk from actual incitement to violence? When do online words become criminal activity? These are questions courts all over the world are dealing with as social media becomes more and more a part of our lives and our legal systems.
Yeah, it's almost like the law is trying to catch up with technology.
Right.
We have these long-standing legal principles that were made for a world without the internet, and now we're trying to apply them to this rapidly changing digital landscape where information spreads instantly, and the lines between personal expression and public incitement can get really blurry.
You're exactly right. This case is forcing South Africa and any country with a strong online presence, for that matter, to confront some tough questions.
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance the need to prevent harm with the fundamental right to free speech, especially in a digital age where a single tweet can reach millions of people in a split second?
It's a challenge that goes beyond the legal details. It touches on fundamental principles of democracy, individual rights, the whole changing nature of communication.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers.
Exactly. And if you look at how other countries are dealing with online speech regulation, you see a wide range of approaches.
Okay.
Some are all about tighter controls, especially when it comes to things that could incite violence or hatred. Others prioritize free speech, or saying even offensive or controversial ideas should be allowed to exist in the marketplace of ideas.
It feels like finding that right balance is incredibly hard.
It is.
Too much regulation.
Yeah.
And you risk stifling dissent and limiting open dialogue.
Right.
But too little, and you could allow harmful and dangerous rhetoric to spread unchecked.
Precisely. And it's even more complicated because the internet is global.
Yeah.
National laws often struggle to keep up with these platforms that operate across borders and cultures,
Right.
where content can be created in one country and have a huge impact in another.
It makes you wonder if we need some kind of international framework for online speech, something that recognizes both the universal right to free expression and the need to protect people and societies from online harms.
That's a debate that's definitely gaining traction globally.
Yeah.
Some argue that a unified approach is the only way to effectively deal with things like online incitement, hate speech, disinformation that often go beyond national borders.
Right.
But others are worried that such a framework could be used to censor legitimate dissent, or that it would be impossible to enforce fairly across different cultures and contexts.
It's a tricky issue with no simple solutions. But one thing is for sure, this case in South Africa is a small-scale version of a much bigger global discussion about how we handle freedom of expression in the digital age.
And that's what makes it so interesting. It's not just a legal fight, it's a reflection of society.
Right.
It forces us to look at our own online behavior, the power of words, and the changing relationship between technology law and human interaction.
It definitely makes you think twice before hitting send, knowing that a quick online comment could have serious consequences.
It reminds us that the digital world isn't some separate place with its own rules. What we do online can have real-world impact, and this case really brings that home.
So as this case moves forward, what should we be watching for? What are the key things that could tell us how South Africa is approaching this complicated issue of online speech and its potential to cause violence?
Well, one really important thing is how the court ultimately interprets Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla's social media posts. Will they just focus on the exact words she used, or will they take into account the broader context to her relationship with her father, the emotionally charged atmosphere during the riots, and the fact that her post didn't explicitly call for violence?
So will they treat online speech like any other kind of communication, or will they acknowledge the unique dynamics of the online world?
Exactly. Their interpretation could set a precedent for future cases about online speech and incitement in South Africa. If they go with a narrow interpretation focusing just on the words themselves, it could have a chilling effect, making people afraid to express themselves freely online, even if they don't mean any harm.
Yeah, it could stifle open debate and critical discussion, which are so important for any healthy democracy.
Right, but on the other hand, if the court takes a broader view considering context and intent, it could send a signal that freedom of expression, even online, is a core value in South African society.
It would suggest that they're being nuanced, recognizing that online communication is complex and that we need to balance free speech with preventing harm.
Exactly, and that's what makes this case so important. It's not just about what one person did, it's about defining the limits of acceptable online behavior in a country still grappling with a history of political turmoil and social unrest.
It's a high-stakes legal battle with implications that go far beyond the courtroom.
Absolutely. This case could shape how South Africa and maybe even other countries tackle the increasingly difficult task of regulating online speech in a way that protects both individual rights and the well-being of society.
Okay, so we've gone through the legal arguments, the ins and outs of online speech regulation, and we've even touched on the global implications of this case, but let's bring it back down to earth. What does this all mean for, the everyday person scrolling through their feed?
I think the biggest takeaway is realizing that our words online actually carry weight. It's easy to think of social media as this separate space where the usual rules don't apply, but this case is a real reminder that what we say online can have consequences in the real world for ourselves and for others.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, think before you speak, has become think before you post. The lines are getting blurry between who we are online and offline, and this case forces us to face that.
Exactly. It's a challenge to be more aware of our digital footprint, to really think about how our words might affect others, even in the fast-paced world of social media. It's not about censoring ourselves or avoiding debate. It's about being more responsible and thoughtful in how we communicate online.
So how can we as individuals find that balance? How do we have these passionate discussions online without crossing the line into harmful rhetoric?
Well, it starts with remembering that even with all its anonymity and speed, the digital world is still a human space. There are real people behind those screens, and our words can have a big impact on their lives. So before you hit that send button, pause for a second and think about the potential consequences. Ask yourself, would I say this to someone's face? Could this hurt someone or spread false information?
It's about having empathy and realizing that even though the internet seems vast and impersonal, it really reflects who we are as individuals and as a society.
You got it. And it's also about understanding that context is key. A comment that might seem harmless in one situation could be really hurtful or even dangerous in another. So think about the audience, the platform, the overall social climate when you're writing your message.
So it's not just what we say, but also where and when we say it, and even if we have good intentions, our words can be misunderstood or used in ways we didn't expect.
Absolutely. The internet can take a message and amplify it in ways you wouldn't believe something you meant as a joke or a question to get people thinking can quickly get out of hand. So it's crucial to be aware of those unintended consequences and to take responsibility for what we create and share online.
This case really highlights how important media literacy is. We need to be critical thinkers. When we see information online, question our sources, consider different viewpoints, and be wary of anything that just reinforces our own biases.
Media literacy is more crucial now than ever before. We're flooded with information from everywhere, and it's easy to get trapped in these online echo chambers where everyone agrees with each other.
Right.
But we have the power to choose what we consume, what we choose to believe, and how we participate in the digital world.
So it's about being an active and informed participant, not just passively taking everything in. It's about recognizing that our choices have an impact and that we have a responsibility to make the online environment healthier and more constructive.
This case might be focused on what one person did, but it started a much wider conversation about the nature of online speech, the power of words, and how technology and society are evolving together. It's a conversation we all need to be a part of.
This deep dive has definitely been eye-opening for me, and I hope it's given our listeners something to think about too. The digital world is always changing, and it's up to us to shape it in a way that promotes positive change and meaningful connection.
And remember, this conversation doesn't end here as technology keeps advancing and we learn more about the online world. We'll have to keep adapting how we communicate online, always trying to find that balance between freedom of expression and preventing harm.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Unseen Wisdom. We encourage you to keep the conversation going in the comments below. Share your thoughts on the Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla case, the challenges of regulating online speech, and how we can all work towards a more responsible and thoughtful digital world.
We're all in this together, figuring out this complex and ever-changing digital world. Let's make it a place where we can have meaningful conversations, challenge our own views, and strive for a better future. Thanks for listening.